Dad sold my laptop for Sis's phone, so I sold his car in return. He thought my laptop was just another toy in his kingdom to be traded at will until he realized I understood value better than he ever would. He didn't know that while he was busy boasting about his restored Mustang, I was learning how to transfer titles, how to wield paperwork like a scalpel. He taught me that everything has a price, so when he crossed the line, I didn't beg or plead, I simply calculated. And with one quiet transaction, I bought back my future and sold off his. The empty space on my desk screamed louder than my father ever could. It was a perfect, dust-free rectangle, a phantom limb where my entire future had been sitting just this morning. My MacBook Pro, the heart of my graphic design studies, the vessel of my freelance career, the literal engine of my dreams was gone. A cold, metallic dread coiled in my stomach, a serpent of pure panic. I had a deadline for a client in San Francisco in 3 days. My final portfolio for my senior year was due in 2 weeks. Every file, every project, every asset I had ever created was on that machine. I bolted out of my room, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I found him in the living room, feet up on the coffee table, watching some sports recap show, the picture of suburban tranquility. My little sister, Maya, was curled up on the armchair, her face illuminated by the glow of a brand new phone, the box sitting ostentatiously on the end table. Dad. My voice was tight, thin. He grunted, not taking his eyes off the screen. What? Liv? My laptop. It's gone. He finally looked at me, his expression unreadable. Robert Reyes, my father, owner of Reyes & Sons Auto, was a man built of engine grease and stubborn opinions. To him, the world with simple things either had a practical, four-wheeled purpose, or they were frivolous. My art fell squarely into the latter category. I know, he said, his voice flat. He turned his attention back to the TV. The serpent in my gut tightened its coils. What do you mean? Did someone break in? We have to call the police. He sighed, a long, theatrical sound of parental burden. He picked up the remote and muted the television. Nobody broke in. Olivia, calm down. It's just a computer. Just a computer. The words hit me with physical force. It wasn't just a computer. It was my livelihood. It was the tuition I paid myself, the independence I was clawing for. It was the thousands of hours I'd poured into my craft, learning, creating, and building something for myself that had nothing to do with spark plugs or transmissions. Where is it? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He gestured with his chin toward my sister. Your sister needed a new phone. Her old one was a piece of junk. You know how important it is for a girl her age to stay connected with her friends. I stared at Maya. She had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, her thumbs frozen over the gleaming screen of what was probably the latest, most expensive model. The price of that phone was easily half the value of my professional-grade laptop. You're kidding me. I breathed, the reality crashing down on me with the force of a physical blow. Tell me you're kidding. Don't be so dramatic, he scoffed, his tone hardening. It was the same tone he used whenever I tried to explain the complexities of a design project, the you're making a fuss over nothing tone. I sold it. Got a good price for it, too. Put it toward a good cause. Family helps family. Sold it. He had taken my property, the one thing in the world that was mine, bought with my own hard-earned money from countless late-night freelance gigs, and sold it without my permission, to buy a toy for the golden child, Maya, who he was grooming for a sensible business degree, whose social life was apparently a family investment. I felt the blood drain from my face, my work, Dad, my entire portfolio, my client files. Everything was on there. You can get it off that cloud thing, can't you? He said dismissively. It's not a big deal. He had no idea. I had backups, of course, but not of the most recent work. The project for the San Francisco client was local. The final renders for my portfolio Gone. Weeks of work, vaporized. No, I said, my voice shaking with a rage so pure it felt like ice. No, I can't. And that's not the point. You had no right. I have every right, he boomed, finally getting to his feet. At 50, he was still a formidable man, his body hardened from years of wrestling with engines. I am the head of this household. What's mine is mine, and what's yours is mine until you're out from under my roof. Your sister had a need. I met it. That's what a father does. His words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the room. What's yours is mine. He didn't see my laptop as my tool, my career. He saw it as just another asset in his domestic kingdom, to be liquidated and redistributed as he saw fit. He saw me as an asset, a faulty, non-compliant one. I looked from his rigid, self-righteous face to Maya's, who was now staring at her new phone as if it were a venomous snake. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She never did when Dad was on a tear. Something inside me didn't just break. It calcified. It turned from a hot, messy fury into something cold, sharp, and perfectly clear. He had taken the most valuable thing in my world to prove his power. He had demonstrated, in the cruelest way possible, how little he valued my life's work. Fine. I would respond in a language he understood. I wouldn't yell, I wouldn't cry, I wouldn't plead. I would simply rebalance the scales. My gaze drifted past him, through the living room window to the driveway. Parked there, gleaming under the setting Texas sun, was his pride and joy. His 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1, the car he'd spent a decade restoring. The one thing in his life he loved without condition. He thought my laptop was just a thing. I was about to teach him what it felt like to have a thing you love turned into currency. I walked back to my room in a daze, shutting the door with a soft click that felt more final than a slam. The argument wasn't over. It had just begun. But the next stage wouldn't be fought with words. My father didn't respect my words. He respected actions, power, and assets. I sat on my bed, staring at the perfect laptop-shaped void on my desk. It was a monument to his disregard. This wasn't new, not really. It was just the loudest, most destructive expression of a dynamic that had defined my entire life. My father, Robert Reyes, lived in a world of steel, gasoline, and tangible results. At Reyes & Sons Auto, he was a king in a kingdom of hydraulic lifts and roaring engines. He could diagnose a faulty transmission by its sound. His hands, permanently stained with a faint layer of grease, could bring dead machines back to life. To him, this was real work. It was honorable. It had weight. My world, a world of pixels, vectors, and color theory had no weight. It was ethereal, something that existed behind a screen. He called my freelance work playing on the computer. When I won a university-wide award for a branding project, he'd grunted and asked if it came with any prize money. When I explained it was for academic recognition, he'd shrugged. So, a fancy A on your report card. Good for you. But when Maya made the honor roll in her pre-business program, he took the whole family out for steaks to celebrate his future CEO. Maya was the designated successor to his idea of the American dream. Not in the garage that was for a son he never had, but in a clean, respectable office building. He poured resources into her. Tutoring for her math classes, a generous allowance for social events to network, and now, a top-of-the-line phone. She was his sound investment. I was his struggling artist, a flighty, unreliable stock he was waiting to divest from. The worst part was that I had bought the laptop myself. I saved for a year, taking on every mind-numbing gig I could find, designing cheesy logos for local bakeries, creating social media banners for car dealerships, formatting newsletters for dentists. I worked through nights and weekends, sacrificing sleep and my social life. That machine wasn't a gift. It was a trophy of my own hard work, a declaration of independence. And he had pawned it as if it were some bauble he'd bought me at the mall. He didn't just sell an object. He sold my effort, my ambition, and my declaration that I could build a life on my own terms. My gaze drifted back to the window, to the driveway where the Mustang sat. That car was his magnum opus. A 1969 Mach 1 Cherry Red with a black hood scoop, a 428 Cobra jet engine rumbling under the hood. It was his youth, his rebellion, his version of art. He'd found it as a rusted-out shell and spent the better part of a decade restoring it. Every Sunday was a ritual, the gentle washing, the meticulous polishing of chrome, the reverent opening of the hood to an audience of admiring neighbors. He talked about its torque and horsepower the way I talked about kerning and RGB values. It was the one thing he'd created that wasn't just for function, but for beauty and power. It was his masterpiece, and he was so proud of it that he kept all its documentation in one place, a locked metal file box in the bottom drawer of his home office desk. He'd shown it to me once, years ago, when he'd first gotten the official vintage plates. "This is the car's soul. Live," he'd said, tapping the folder containing the title, the bill of sale, the full restoration history. Everything you need to prove she's the real deal. He thought he was teaching me a lesson about family hierarchy and a father's authority. He thought he was putting my frivolous dreams back in their place. But the only lesson I was learning was one he'd taught me by accident: how to identify an asset, appraise its value, and liquidate it. He dealt in the tangible. So would I. My plan began to form, not out of hot-headed anger anymore, but with the cool precision of a design project. I knew the collectors he talked to. I'd overheard the names at countless barbecues. I knew the price he'd bragged about turning down last year. The key to the file box was on his main keyring, the one he always left in the ceramic dish by the front door when he came home. He was a creature of habit and pride, and his pride was about to fund my future. He took my masterpiece, the one I'd built with my own 2 hands on a glowing screen. It was only fair I take his. The next morning, the house was thick with a tense, unspoken truce. My father acted as if nothing had happened, whistling as he made coffee, the picture of blameless authority. Maya scurried around, avoiding my gaze, her new phone conspicuously absent. It was probably hidden in her room, a glowing symbol of guilt she couldn't bear to look at. I played my part, eating my toast in silence, my mind a whirring engine of logistics. The rage had cooled into a hard, dense resolve. I felt like a spy in my own home. The first step was recon. While Dad was in the shower, I slipped into the garage. It smelled of oil, metal, and his specific brand of stubbornness. The Mustang was there, under a soft gray cover, looking like a sleeping giant. My plan felt audacious, insane even, standing this close to the object of his obsession. But then I'd think of the blank space on my desk, the client I was about to lose, the portfolio I had to rebuild from scratch, and the insanity crystallized into necessity. The real test came later. Dad left for his garage, his routine as predictable as the sunrise. As I heard his truck rumble down the street, my heart started pounding. It was time. I walked to the ceramic dish by the door. There they were, the keys. A heavy, jangling collection of his life, the garage, the house, his truck, and tucked amongst them, the small, unassuming key to the file box. My hands trembled as I unlocked his home office. The room was meticulously organized, a stark contrast to my creative chaos. I went straight to the desk, pulled open the bottom drawer, and there it was, the gray metal box. Using the small key, I opened it. A wave of his Old Spice cologne seemed to rise from the files. Inside, nestled in a pristine plastic sleeve, was the official certificate of title for the 1969 Ford Mustang. My name wasn't on it. His was Robert Reyes. This was the biggest hurdle. In Texas, selling a car without the owner present is difficult, but not impossible, especially with the right paperwork. I took a picture of the title with my phone. Then, I found what I was looking for, a blank, official-looking document from the DMV he'd picked up a while back just in case. It was a vehicle power of attorney form. It would allow me to act on his behalf. I needed his signature, and I wasn't about to attempt a forgery. My plan was simpler and crueler. My freelance work had made me proficient in more than just Adobe Illustrator. I was good at mimicking styles, at understanding visual language. I spent the next hour at the public library, using their clunky desktop to draft a document. It was a sales agreement, pre-filled with all the Mustang's details, VIN, mileage, model year culled from the insurance papers I'd also found in the box. I left the buyer's name and the price blank. At the bottom was a signature line for the seller, Robert Reyes. I printed 2 documents, the power of attorney form and my sales agreement. Back at home, I found an old invoice from his garage. I scanned his signature, cleaned it up in a photo editing app on the library computer, and then, using a technique I'd learned for a branding project, I turned it into a high-resolution digital stamp. It wasn't a forgery, it was a digital asset. The distinction was important, at least to me. The true escalation came that evening. I approached him while he was watching TV, the 2 documents on a clipboard. I kept my expression neutral, my voice steady. "Dad, I need you to sign something for my financial aid," I said, a lie that tasted like ash in my mouth. "They updated their dependency forms. They need a parent's signature confirming my residency." He grunted, annoyed at the interruption. "What is this now? More paperwork for your useless degree." "It's the last one, I promise," I said, keeping my voice light. He snatched the clipboard from me. I had strategically placed the phony sales agreement underneath the power of attorney form. He only glanced at the top page, which was filled with convincing-looking but ultimately meaningless bureaucratic jargon I'd copied from a sample university form. His eyes went straight to the signature line at the bottom. "Here," he asked, annoyed. "Yeah, right there," I said, my heart threatening to beat its way out of my chest. He scribbled his signature, that familiar, jagged script on the line at the bottom of the power of attorney form, without reading a single word of the document itself. His arrogance was my greatest ally. He couldn't imagine a world where I would, or could, deceive him on this level. He handed the clipboard back. "There. Now leave me in peace." I walked away, my legs feeling like jelly. I had it. A legally binding document giving me power of attorney, signed by him. His signature, freely given. It wasn't a forgery. It was a delegation of power he had granted out of sheer, contemptuous indifference. He hadn't just ignored the fine print. He'd ignored me. He saw me as a nuisance with paperwork, not as a threat. That was his second mistake. The first was selling my laptop. Now, all I needed was a buyer, and I knew exactly who to call. The phone felt unnaturally heavy in my hand. I was sitting in my car, parked a block away from my house, the signed power of attorney form on the passenger seat like a ticking bomb. My target was a man named Marcus Thorne. I'd heard his name dropped by my father dozens of times. Thorne was a serious collector from Dallas, a man with deep pockets and a specific passion for American muscle cars from the late 60s. More importantly, I knew from Dad's bitter complaints that Thorne had made a standing offer of $70,000 for the Mustang last year, an offer Dad had smugly rejected, saying, "You can't put a price on perfection." I was about to. Finding his number was surprisingly easy. A few targeted searches for classic car collectors in Dallas, and his business, Thorne's Vintage Motors, popped up. I took a deep, shuddering breath and dialed. "Thorne." A gruff voice answered. "Mr. Thorne, my name is Olivia Reyes. My father is Robert Reyes. You expressed interest in his 1969 Mustang Mach 1 last year. I delivered the lines I'd rehearsed, my voice sounding more confident than I felt. There was a pause on the other end. Robert's kid. "Yeah, I remember the car. A real cherry. Don't tell me he's finally decided to part with her." There was a hint of amusement in his voice, the sound of a man who enjoyed the hunt. "He has," I said, the lie sliding out more easily this time. "Something's come up. He's motivated to sell quickly. He asked me to handle the arrangements. Is that so? Thorne sounded skeptical. Robert doesn't strike me as the type to delegate a sale like this. This was the moment. He signed a power of attorney, giving me full authority to handle the transaction. I stated, my tone firm. I can email you a copy, along with the VIN and recent photos. He's willing to accept your previous offer of $70,000, provided the sale can be concluded by the end of the week. The silence on the other end was electric. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. A prized car, one he'd been chasing, suddenly available for a price he'd already deemed fair, with the promise of a quick, no-hassle sale. It was a collector's dream. "Send me the documents," he said finally, his voice all business. "If the paperwork is legit, I can have a hauler in Austin by Friday and a cashier's check in your hand." After I hung up, the adrenaline drained away, replaced by a profound, hollow ache. This was real. I had set in motion a betrayal that mirrored my father's, but on a scale he could never have imagined. I was selling his soul, as he'd once called it. For a moment, sitting in the silence of my beat-up sedan, I almost lost my nerve. A wave of guilt washed over me, so strong it made me dizzy. He was my father. Despite his flaws, his dismissiveness, his infuriating patriarchal pride, he was still my dad. He'd taught me how to ride a bike. He'd been there at my high school graduation, albeit with a look of bored impatience. Were my laptop and my pride worth blowing up our family? My phone buzzed. It was an email notification from my professor. The subject line read, "Final portfolio, in-person review, required." My blood ran cold. The email explained that due to a new departmental policy to prevent academic dishonesty, all senior design students were required to present their final portfolios from their own working files, on their own machines, during a live, in-person review. Using a backup on a university computer was no longer an option. The final review was in 10 days. It was as if the universe was conspiring to corner me. Without my laptop, I wouldn't just fail the project, I would fail to graduate. All the work, all the tuition I'd paid, all the sacrifices, all of it would be for nothing. My father hadn't just sold my computer. He had potentially destroyed my entire academic and professional future with one selfish, thoughtless act. Any lingering guilt evaporated, replaced by a white-hot, clarifying fury. This was no longer just about teaching him a lesson or getting revenge. This was about survival. He had pushed me to the edge of a cliff, and now he was complaining that I was thinking about building a bridge out of his prized possessions. My resolve hardened from steel into diamond. I drove to a 24-hour print shop, my hands steady on the wheel. I scanned the power of attorney and the photo of the car's title and emailed them to Marcus Thorne. Then I went home and logged into my bank account. My balance was $317.24, not enough to cover rent, let alone replace a professional-grade machine. I thought about the conversation I would have with Thorne. The $70,000. It felt like a mythical number, enough to buy the best laptop on the market, enough to put a down payment on a small studio apartment, to get out from under my father's roof for good, enough to be truly, fully independent. He had started this war, but I was going to end it. I wasn't just selling his car. I was buying my freedom. The girl who had trembled with guilt in her car just an hour ago was gone. In her place was a woman who understood the price of everything, especially her own future, and she was no longer willing to have it discounted. Friday arrived with the oppressive stillness of a Texas summer morning. The air was already thick and humid, promising a sweltering afternoon. I'd been up since dawn, a knot of nervous energy twisting in my stomach. Marcus Thorne had called the day before to confirm. His hauler would arrive around 10 a.m. My father was at his garage, oblivious, believing it was just another day of fixing other people's problems, secure in the knowledge that his own perfect world was waiting for him back at home. At 10:03, a massive flatbed truck, gleaming and professional, rumbled down our quiet suburban street and hissed to a stop in front of the house. Marcus Thorne, a man who looked exactly like his gruff voice Stocky. With a salt and pepper beard and sharp, appraising eyes, stepped out of the cab. He gave me a curt nod. "Olivia Reyes, Mr. Thorne," I replied, my voice steady. I led him to the garage. I pulled the soft cover off the Mustang. Even I had to admit it was a thing of beauty. The cherry red paint seemed to drink the light. The chrome trim glittered, and it smelled of wax and expensive leather. It was a monument to my father's passion. Thorne let out a low whistle, walking a slow circle around the car, his eyes missing nothing. "She's even better in person," he murmured, running a hand gently over the fender as if it were a sleeping animal. He did a quick check under the hood, looked at the odometer, and then turned to me. "All right, the bank draft is right here, $70,000. We sign the title. My guy loads her up, and we're out of your hair." He held out a thick envelope. Inside, I could see the cashier's check. It looked powerful. It was the physical manifestation of my future. My hand was shaking as I took out the papers, the original title and the sales agreement I had prepared. And then I heard it. The sound of my father's truck turning into the driveway. My blood ran cold. He never came home for lunch. Never. My heart slammed against my ribs. Thorne looked up, sensing the shift in the air. The side door to the garage flew open. And there he was, Robert Reyes, wiping grease from his hands with a rag, a confused look on his face. "What's all this noise?" I saw a holler. His eyes landed on Marcus Thorne, then on the Mustang, uncovered and gleaming, then, finally, on the papers in my hand. His confusion curdled into disbelief, then into a dark, thunderous rage. "Olivia," he said, his voice dangerously low. "What the hell is going on here?" "Hello." "Robert," Thorne said. "Ever the businessman. Your daughter is just helping you part with this beauty. You've raised a very efficient young woman." My father ignored him completely. His eyes locked on mine. "This is a joke, right? You hired your actor friends to play some sick prank." He let out a short, harsh laugh, but there was no humor in it. It was the sound of a man trying to force reality to bend to his will. I met his gaze. The fear I'd felt moments before was gone, burned away by the finality of the moment. "It's not a joke." "Dad," I said, my voice as cold and clear as glass, "I'm selling the car." The world seemed to stop. The rag dropped from his hand. "You're—" "What?" "You sold my laptop. My career. The tool I needed to graduate. So I'm selling your car, your hobby, the thing you love more than anything," I said, the words coming out in a calm, even torrent. "I'm just reallocating a family asset to cover a more pressing need. Isn't that what a father does? Family helps family." I threw his own words back at him like stones. His face went from pale to a deep, blotchy red. "You have no right," he roared, taking a step toward me. "That car is in my name. This is theft." He lunged for the papers, but I stepped back, holding them up. "Actually, it's perfectly legal." Thorne, looking increasingly uncomfortable but also intrigued, crossed his arms. "Son, she has the title. She can't sign it," my father bellowed. Turning on him, "I'm the owner." "Get out of my garage. This deal is off. I'm afraid it's not," I said. I pulled the other paper from my clipboard, the one he'd signed so dismissively. "You gave me the right yourself." I held out the power of attorney form. He stared at it, his eyes scanning the text he hadn't bothered to read before. Then they fell on the bottom line, on his own signature. The rage in his face collapsed. It was like watching a building be demolished, all the structural integrity giving way at once, leaving nothing but a pile of rubble. He looked from his signature on the page to my face, and for the first time, I think he truly saw me. He saw not his flighty artistic daughter, but a strategist who had used his own pride and negligence as a weapon against him. He was beaten, and he knew it. "You," he whispered, the single word filled with a universe of shock and betrayal. I turned to Thorne and handed him the pen. "Let's sign." While Thorne finalized the title, my father just stood there, speechless and shaking, a ghost in his own garage. Maya had appeared in the doorway, drawn by the shouting, her face pale with horror. She watched as the hauler driver expertly winched the gleaming red Mustang onto the flatbed. The sound was a metallic scream of finality. My father didn't move. He just watched his masterpiece, his soul, being strapped down, prepared for a journey away from him forever. As the truck's engine roared to life, he looked at me, his eyes hollow. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, gaping wound. I held the cashier's check in my hand. It felt both as heavy as an anchor and as light as a feather. I had won, but standing there, in the wreckage of my family, the victory tasted like ash. The silence that descended after the hauler rounded the corner was heavier and more suffocating than the argument had ever been. It was a silence filled with the ghost of a roaring engine and the phantom gleam of cherry-red paint. My father stood in the middle of the garage, in the empty space where the Mustang had been parked for a decade. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, as if the car had been a part of his physical stature. Maya was crying softly in the doorway, her face buried in her hands. She finally looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy. "How could you live?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "You destroyed him." "He destroyed my future first," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I was numb. The cashier's check in my pocket felt like a cold, hard stone. "This isn't about him. It's about me being able to graduate and have a life, something he was about to take away from me over a phone." My father finally moved. He walked slowly, almost shuffling, past me and into the house without a single word. He didn't yell. He didn't curse me. That would have been easier to handle. The profound, empty silence was a condemnation far worse than any words. He walked into the living room and sat down in his armchair, staring at the blank television screen. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. I knew I couldn't stay there. The air was poison. I went to my room, the one place that felt remotely like mine, and packed a bag, clothes, my few textbooks, my drawing tablet, the essentials. I didn't have much. As I zipped up the bag, I saw the dust-free rectangle on my desk, the origin of it all, with the $70,000 check. I didn't just buy a new laptop. I bought a new life. The first stop was the Apple Store, where I bought the most powerful MacBook Pro they had. The feeling of unboxing it, of seeing that familiar logo light up, was a relief so profound it almost brought me to my knees. I spent the next 48 hours in a feverish haze at a coffee shop, fueled by caffeine and sheer will, rebuilding what I could of my portfolio and finishing the client project. I made the deadline. The next check I wrote was a deposit and first month's rent on a small studio apartment across town, near the university. It was tiny, with a view of a brick wall, but it was all mine. The freedom was intoxicating. I could work until 3 a.m. without worrying about the light under my door. I could leave my design books scattered on the floor. I was no longer under his roof, which meant the old rule, "what's yours is mine," was null and void. I didn't speak to my father for weeks. Maya would text me occasionally short, guilt-ridden messages. "Dad doesn't leave his chair. He doesn't talk. He just sits there." I would read them and feel a pang of something not regret, but a deep, aching sorrow for the family we could have been. I aced my final portfolio review. My professor pulled me aside afterward, impressed. "Olivia, your work has a new edge to it," he said. "A kind of raw power I haven't seen before. What changed?" "I changed my primary asset," I replied, a small, sad smile on my face. The true resolution came a month later. A plain white envelope arrived at my new apartment. No return address. But I recognized the spiky, aggressive handwriting. It was from my father. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside wasn't a letter. It was a single, folded piece of paper. It was the receipt for a brand new iPhone, the exact model he had bought for Maya. Tucked inside was the money, $1, $200 in crisp $100 bills. At the bottom of the receipt, he had written 2 words. "I'm sorry. It wasn't a fix. It wasn't absolution. It couldn't erase the betrayal or the brutal lesson I had to teach him. It couldn't bring the Mustang back or mend the chasm that had opened up between us, but it was a start. It was an acknowledgement. It was him, for the first time in my life, speaking my language, not the language of horsepower or parental authority, but the language of value. He had finally understood that my work, my dream, had a price, and he had tried, in his own broken way, to pay it back. I put the money aside. I didn't need it anymore. I was paying my own way, on my own terms. The check from the car sale was my foundation, but the career I was building was my own. I never knew if he and Maya returned the phone. I never asked. Our relationship is not what it was. It's quieter, more cautious. We are 2 sovereign nations who have learned the cost of war. He still runs his garage, and I run my freelance business from my small studio, sometimes on Sundays. I imagine he walks into his garage and feels the cold, empty space where his masterpiece used to be. I hope it reminds him not just of what he lost, but of what I was forced to build in its place, a future he never saw coming, forged in the fire of his own disregard.